The father's justice. I realized my brother wasn't a man anymore, just a shadow asking permission to exist. My name is William Foster. I'm 62, and I've spent most of my life believing that if something was wrong in my family, I would see it, and I would fix it. Henry Foster is my identical twin. Same face, same voice, same quiet habit of pausing before he speaks. But somewhere along the years, that pause turned into hesitation, and that hesitation turned into silence. I didn't notice it all at once. It happened slowly, like a room getting darker without anyone touching the light switch. We used to sit on his back porch in the evenings, two old men pretending we weren't getting older, talking about work, about the kids, about nothing that really mattered. And every now and then, Henry would glance toward the kitchen window, not long, just a second, but enough to check if Rebecca was watching. At first, I told myself it was normal. Marriage changes people. Responsibilities pile up. You adjust. But then I started noticing the small things. The way he would lower his voice when he answered a simple question. The way he would stop mid-sentence and rephrase it. Softer. Safer. I remember one afternoon, sunlight coming through the blinds in thin stripes across the table. I asked him if he wanted to take a weekend trip. Nothing big. Just fishing like we used to. He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'll have to check with Rebecca," he said, like a man asking for clearance, not making a choice. That's when something in my chest tightened. Not anger. Not yet. Something quieter. Something that didn't have a name but felt like it should have been obvious years ago. Over time, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Henry didn't decide things anymore. He negotiated his own life in pieces. Small requests, careful wording, waiting for approval that always came with a condition. And the worst part, he didn't seem to see it. I've worked long enough to recognize control when I see it. Not the loud kind, not the kind that leaves bruises, but the quiet kind. The kind that rearranges a person until they forget what they used to look like. Maybe you've seen it too. Maybe you're living in it right now. Or maybe it's someone you love. Someone who slowly stopped arguing, stopped choosing, stopped being fully there. You tell yourself it's just how things are, that it's easier not to push, that keeping the peace is the same as being okay. But it isn't. And I kept watching, day after day, year after year, telling myself I would step in when it got bad enough. The truth is, I didn't know what bad enough looked like. Until the night my phone lit up, and I saw Henry's name at a time he should have been asleep. And for the first time in years, I realized something had finally cracked. But I didn't yet know how far it had already broken. My phone lit up at 2:14 a.m., the kind of hour where anything that rings is already wrong. I reached for it before the second vibration, saw Henry's name, and something in my body was already awake before my mind caught up. "Where are you?" I asked. No greeting, no hesitation. There was a pause, not silence, breathing, uneven, like he was trying to steady himself enough to speak. "In the car, parking lot, near Hyde Park," he said, voice low, thinner than I remembered. I sat up, the room still dark, the soft hum of the ceiling fan, the only other sound. "It's 2 a.m, Henry." "I know," he said, quick, almost apologizing for the time. I couldn't go back in." That sentence stayed there, unfinished, heavy in a way that didn't need explanation. "What happened?" Another pause. Longer this time. I could hear him swallow. Hear the small movements of someone sitting alone in a car with the engine off. "I asked her something," he said finally. "Just one thing." I didn't interrupt. I asked if I could go fishing next weekend, just a couple days, with Butch's cousin. Fishing. Something simple. Something he used to do without thinking. "It's been 4 years," he added, as he needed me to understand that part. "And?" I asked. She said no. No anger in his voice. No frustration. Just the plain delivery of a fact. I waited. I told her I could do both. Go fishing and still get the garage organized before the Pattersons come. He continued, words careful, measured, like he was replaying the conversation, step by step. And what did she say? He let out a breath. Slow, controlled. She didn't argue. That caught my attention, more than if he had said she yelled. She just looked at me and said, "I thought you cared about this family." The way he repeated it, exact, quiet, told me everything I needed to know about how it landed. No raised voice, no fight, just a sentence placed carefully where it would hurt the most. "I've been sitting here for an hour," he said. "I don't know how to walk back in there after that." I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor. I couldn't really see. It would have been easier if she had shouted, easier if there had been something obvious to push against. But this was different. This was control that didn't need volume, control that didn't leave marks. A quiet shift, a sentence that turned a simple request into a question of loyalty. And suddenly going fishing wasn't about fishing anymore. It was about whether he was a good husband, a good father, a good man. "That's not a no, Henry," I said slowly. "That's something else." He didn't answer right away. "I know," he said eventually, softer, like he had known it for a long time, but never said it out loud. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the silence between his breaths. In 20 years, I'd seen men controlled by fear, by anger, by force. But this was something quieter, something that worked because it didn't look like control at all. No yelling, no threats, just a steady pressure that made him question his own choices until he stopped making them. And as I listened to my brother sitting alone in a dark parking lot, afraid to go home over a weekend fishing trip, I realized this wasn't about one conversation. It wasn't even about that night. This had been happening for years, maybe decades, and I had missed it. Which meant the real question wasn't what had just happened. It was how long it had been happening without anyone saying a word. He talked for over an hour, and the more he spoke, the clearer the pattern became. Not loud, not chaotic, just precise, consistent, practiced over years, until it looked like normal life. It started with money. Or at least that's where I could see it most clearly. Henry's paycheck went into an account in Rebecca's name. Always had. He said it like it was a system, not a decision. "What do you mean always?" I asked. "Since we got married," he said. Like that explained everything. He got what he called an allowance, a fixed amount each week for gas, lunch, small things. I could hear him hesitate on that word, allowance. Like it didn't quite belong to a man his age, but he had used it long enough that it no longer felt strange. "And if you needed more?" I'd ask. The way he said it wasn't defensive, it wasn't even embarrassed, it was just how things worked. I sat there, staring at the edge of my nightstand, trying to map out when that line had been crossed. Because it doesn't happen all at once. It never does. Then came the job. There had been a promotion, years back, a good one, the kind that changes a life if you let it. It was in Portland, he said. I wanted it. I could hear that part clearly. No hesitation, no doubt. And she called my supervisor, told him I had decided to stay, said it wasn't the right time for the family. He found out 2 weeks later, not from her, from the man who thought he had made that choice himself. I leaned back against the wall, closed my eyes for a second, picturing that conversation, a voice speaking for him while he wasn't even in the room. What did she say when you asked her about it? She said she was protecting us. Us. That word again. Doing the work of a decision no one else got to make. Then there were the people, the ones who slowly disappeared. Do you remember George Miller? He asked. I let out a breath. Of course I do. George had been his closest friend, stood next to him on his wedding day, the kind of man who shows up without being asked. Rebecca said he was a bad influence, Henry continued. After his divorce, said that kind of thinking spreads. And you just stopped seeing him? It wasn't all at once. Of course it wasn't. Fewer calls, fewer visits, a comment here, a look there, until one day there was nothing left to stop. I could almost see it. like furniture being removed from a room, piece by piece, until you forget what used to be there. And the kids? I asked. He paused, longer this time. They grew up in it. That was all he said, but it was enough. I pictured Caleb, learning to watch before he spoke, learning which words were safe, which ones would cost him something. I pictured Lily, calling when the house was quiet, choosing her moments carefully. Not because they were told to, but because they had learned. That's how it works. You don't need rules when people learn the pattern on their own. I sat there, phone warm against my ear, the dark room around me suddenly feeling smaller. This wasn't control built on force. It was built on repetition, small adjustments, quiet corrections, until the person inside it stopped noticing the walls. And that's the part that stays with you. A person who knows they're trapped will try to leave. But a person who doesn't recognize the cage will defend it, will explain it, will live in it, like it's the only version of life that makes sense. That's the worst kind, I said quietly, more to myself than to him. What is? Henry asked. I didn't answer right away. A person who doesn't know they've been controlled, I said finally. That's the kind that never even thinks to push back. There was silence on the line. Not empty, just heavy, with something that hadn't been named before. I could feel it settling between us. Not anger, not yet. Something clearer than that. Because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And once you understand how long it's been there, you stop asking if it's a problem. You start asking what you're going to do about it. I looked at the clock on the nightstand, the numbers glowing faint blue in the dark. 2 men, same face, same life once, now standing on completely different sides of something neither of us had fully named until that night. I took a breath, slow, steady, and somewhere in that moment, without saying it out loud yet, I realized I had already made a decision. I didn't say it right away, not to him, not even to myself in a way that sounded final, but the idea was already there, forming in the quiet space between what he had told me and what I knew needed to change. Come to Louisville, I said instead, keeping my voice steady. Practical. Get a room if you have to. Just don't go back tonight. There was hesitation on the line, not resistance, just habit, the kind that makes a man second-guess even the act of stepping away. I can't just leave like that, he said. You already did, I replied. You're sitting in a parking lot at 2 a.m. That landed. I could hear it in the way he stopped talking for a second. By the time I hung up, I was already out of bed, pulling on a shirt in the dark, the house quiet around me. Susan stirred when I turned on the lamp, not fully awake, but aware. She's always been like that. Steady, even in the middle of the night. How bad? She asked, voice low. I sat on the edge of the bed, ran a hand over my face. Bad enough, I said. She didn't ask for details, didn't need them. She just watched me for a moment, then tilted her head slightly. The switch? She said. I looked at her, held that gaze a second longer than usual. We had talked about it before, not as a plan, more like a passing thought, the kind people mention when something feels impossible to fix. What if you just went there and… We had never finished that sentence, until now. Yeah, I said quietly. The switch. She nodded once, slow, deliberate, already moving through what that would mean. How long? A week. Maybe 10 days. She reached for her phone on the nightstand, already thinking ahead. I'll call and adjust things here. That was Susan. No panic, no overreaction, just clear steps. By the time morning came, the outline was already set. When I met Henry the next day, we sat across from each other at a small table by the window, light coming in off the river, gray and steady. Same face, same posture, but 2 completely different men sitting there. You're going to tell me everything, I said. Not harsh, not rushed, just precise. He nodded, and he did. Schedules, exact times he left for work, which route he took, how long it took him to get home, what Rebecca expected for dinner on different nights, how the dishwasher was loaded, where the keys were placed when he walked in, the way he spoke, the pauses, the words he avoided. I wrote it all down, not trusting memory alone, a yellow legal pad filling line by line. Every detail mattered, not because I needed to become him perfectly, but because I needed to understand the system he had been living inside. There's a difference. We practiced small things. How he answered when she called his name. How long he waited before responding. The tone he used when he agreed. And more importantly, the tone he never used when he disagreed. That was where the shift would be. Not loud, not sudden. Just different enough to break the pattern. By the second day, something had settled in me. A kind of calm that doesn't come from confidence, but from clarity. This wasn't about confrontation. It was about stepping into a structure that had been running the same way for decades and quietly changing the way it responded. No arguments, no raised voices, no explanations longer than necessary. Just different choices. On Sunday afternoon, I took his car, a gray sedan that still smelled faintly of the air freshener he always used. The driveway looked exactly the way he had described it. Same angle, same view of the front door. I sat there for a moment, hands on the wheel, letting the stillness settle. Then I stepped out, closed the door, and walked toward the house. I stepped into my brother's life, with a plan that didn't need to shout. Rebecca was in the kitchen when I walked in, standing at the stove, back straight, one hand resting lightly on the counter, as if the room itself belonged to her. "You're late," she said, not looking at me. "Traffic," I answered, same tone Henry would use, calm, neutral. I set the keys on the hook by the door, right side, exactly where he always put them, then moved through the space without hesitation. The first evening passed quietly. Small instructions, small acknowledgments, nothing unusual on the surface. But the shift didn't need to be loud. It just needed to be there. It started the next morning. Rebecca stood across from me with her coffee, already listing things, plans for the week, adjustments I was supposed to make, the usual rhythm of control, dressed up as organization. "I need you to move your thing with Caleb to Sunday," she said, "and make sure the car's out of the driveway before 10. Sandra notices those things." I poured my coffee, took a slow sip, let a second pass. "No," I said. Not sharp, not aggressive, just steady. The word landed differently than anything else in the room. Rebecca didn't freeze. Not exactly. But something paused, like a machine missing a step it had always executed without thinking. "What?" she asked, turning slightly. "Caleb's thing stays where it is," I said, still calm, "and the car's fine where it is." I didn't add anything else, didn't explain, didn't justify. That was the key. Control depends on reaction, on negotiation, on the expectation that every no will come with an explanation that can be challenged, reshaped, redirected. When there's nothing to work with, nothing to push against, the system hesitates. Rebecca looked at me longer this time, searching, not for the answer, but for the version of Henry she expected to respond. It wasn't there. "I'm just asking you to be flexible," she said, voice still even, but tighter now. "I understand," I replied, "and I'm good with everything except those two things." Still no argument, still no escalation. Just a boundary, placed quietly. She turned back to the counter, but the movement wasn't as smooth as before. A small disruption, but enough. Later that day, she shifted strategies. Dinner was prepared perfectly, table set with more care than necessary, tone softer, almost warm. "I was thinking we could repaint the den," she said, passing the bowl across the table. "It would look nicer before the Hendersons come." I took the bowl, set it down. "It looks fine," I said. A brief pause. "It's outdated," she replied, still polite, still composed. "I like it," I said. No argument, no debate, just a statement. Her eyes stayed on me for a second longer, measuring, recalculating. This was the moment where the pattern usually kicked in, where Henry would adjust, soften, agree to keep things moving. But nothing changed. And that's when the first crack showed. Not dramatic, not loud. Just a slight misalignment in the way she held herself. Because control doesn't just rely on authority, it relies on predictability. When the response shifts, even slightly, the entire structure has to adjust. And adjusting means losing certainty. That uncertainty, that's where the power starts to slip. By the second day, I could feel it building. Small pauses in conversation, longer glances, questions that didn't quite land the way they used to. Rebecca wasn't losing control yet, but she was noticing that something wasn't behaving the way it always had. And in that space, that quiet gap between expectation and reality, something else was beginning to take shape. Because when words stop working the way they used to, silence starts doing the work instead. By the third day, Rebecca changed tactics, not in what she said, but in how she stopped saying it. The house felt different that morning, quieter than usual. Not peaceful, just controlled. She moved through the kitchen without a word, coffee poured, cabinet doors closing a little softer than necessary, every action, precise, deliberate. I sat at the table with a folded newspaper, letting the silence settle instead of filling it. This was her first move. Silence, not absence, but pressure. The kind that makes people uncomfortable enough to speak first, to explain, to fix something that hasn't even been named. I didn't. Minutes passed. Then more. Rebecca placed a plate in front of me, without looking up. Eggs, toast, everything arranged the way Henry had described. Still no words. I nodded once. Thank you. Nothing else. No attempt to smooth it over. No question about what was wrong. Because that's the reflex she was waiting for. The need to restore balance. When it didn't come, the silence stretched. Not stronger, just less effective. By the afternoon, she shifted again. Her voice softened, movements lighter, an almost careful warmth replacing the tension. I was thinking, she said, leaning slightly against the counter. We could have dinner out this weekend, just the two of us. An offer. But not really. More like a test. I set my cup down, looked at her. Not avoiding. Not challenging. Just present. That sounds fine, I said. If it works with everything else. Neutral. No eagerness. No resistance. Her expression flickered. Just for a second. Because this version didn't fit either. Not compliance, not pushback, just independent. That's where the pattern started to break. Control depends on predictability. On knowing exactly how the other person will respond, when they'll soften, when they'll defend, when they'll give in. Take that away, and the structure has nothing to hold on to. Later that evening, she tried something more direct. I feel like you've been distant, she said, standing in the doorway, arms loosely crossed. I looked up from the table, pen still in my hand. I'm right here, I said. That's not what I mean, she replied. A slight edge now, carefully placed. Then tell me what you mean, I said. Not confrontational, just clear. That pause, the one that followed. It was different. Not calculated. Not controlled. Uncertain, because the script had changed, and she didn't have the next line ready. I just need things to feel normal, she said finally. I leaned back slightly, letting the chair settle under me. This feels normal to me, I answered. No challenge. No defense. Just a statement she couldn't easily redirect. Her shoulders tightened, not visibly to anyone who didn't know what to look for, but enough. Enough to see the shift. She left the doorway without another word. Not defeated. Not yet. But something had slipped. And that's the part most people miss. Power isn't in what you say. It's in what you stop reacting to. Because once the expected reaction disappears, the control loses its anchor. And without that anchor, even the strongest patterns start to drift. By the end of the day, the house didn't feel controlled anymore. It felt unsettled, like something was moving underneath the surface, something that hadn't been allowed to move in a long time. And for the first time since I walked through that door, Rebecca didn't look certain. She looked like she was trying to figure out what she was losing. Lily called in the afternoon, not on Rebecca's phone, the house line, the one Henry said she always used when she didn't want to be overheard. "Hey, Dad." Her voice came through light, almost casual. But there was something underneath it, listening before speaking. "Hey, sweetheart," I said, keeping the tone steady. A small pause, not long, just enough for her to take measure of the space. "You sound different," she said, not accusing, just careful. Careful. I leaned against the counter, sunlight coming through the blinds in thin lines across the floor. "Different how?" I don't know," she said, just more awake. That word hung there for a second. "Not wrong. Are you okay?" she added. Softer now. "I'm good," I said. "Better than I've been in a while." Another pause, longer this time. "Did you tell Mom no about something?" That one landed clean. I let out a quiet breath, not answering immediately. "Why would you ask that?" "Because she called me," Lily said, and she sounded off. "Off?" "I've never heard her say you were being difficult before," she continued. "She usually saves that for Caleb." There it was. The pattern, named without effort. Children don't always say things directly, but they see everything. "Things change," I said, carefully. "Yeah," she replied, but there was hesitation in it, like she was fitting a new piece into something she had understood a certain way her whole life. We spoke a little longer. Simple things. Work. Her schedule. Nothing that mattered on the surface. But the way she listened, that mattered. She wasn't just hearing words, she was measuring them, comparing them to something she had known for years. And whatever she was noticing, she didn't push. When the call ended, the house felt quieter. Not because of absence, but because something had shifted. That evening, Caleb stopped by, unannounced. He walked in as he belonged there, but his eyes moved differently, slower, taking in more than usual. "Hey," he said, nodding once. "Hey," I replied. We sat on the back porch, the air cooling as the sun dropped behind the houses. He didn't start talking right away, just picked at the edge of a label on his bottle, watching. "You've been different," he said finally, not a question. "Have I?" I asked. He glanced at me, held it for a second. "Yeah." Silence again. Not awkward, just deliberate. Then he leaned back slightly. "You hold your coffee mug differently," he said. That almost made me smile. "Your dad uses both hands," he added. "You don't." There it was. The kind of detail only someone who's been paying attention for years would catch. I set the mug down, slower this time. "How long have you been watching?" I asked. "A few days," he said, then corrected himself. "A lot longer than that." We sat with that. He wasn't asking for confirmation. He already knew. And the important part, he hadn't said anything. Not to Rebecca, not to anyone. "I need you to keep this to yourself," I said quietly. He nodded once, no hesitation. "I've been doing that since I was a kid," he replied. That answer stayed with me. Because it wasn't defiance. It was a habit. Children in houses like this learn early. What to say, what not to say, when to speak, when silence is safer. They don't need rules written down. They absorb them. And once they do, they carry them into every room they walk into. Caleb looked out into the yard, then back at me. "I don't know what you're doing," he said, "but don't stop." I didn't answer. Because the truth was, something had already started. And now, more than one person could see it. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I just started changing how the house felt, one small decision at a time. That morning, I stood in the kitchen with my phone in my hand, thumb hovering over a name Henry hadn't said out loud in years. George Miller. I pressed call before I could second-guess it. It rang longer than expected, then a click. "Hello?" His voice came through cautious, older, but still steady. "George, it's Henry," I said, keeping it simple. Silence, not empty, just full of history that hadn't been touched in a long time. "Henry?" he repeated, slower now, like he wasn't sure he was hearing it right. "Yeah, I know it's been a while," I said, "but I was hoping you could come by this weekend." Another pause, longer this time. "I'd like that," he said finally. No questions, no accusations, just acceptance. I ended the call and set the phone down on the counter, the weight of that one action, settling quietly into the room. Later that day I called Lily. "Come home this weekend," I told her. "Are you serious?" she asked, a hint of surprise slipping through. "Yeah, I'm cooking," I said. She laughed, short, almost disbelieving. "You're cooking? Don't make me regret inviting you," I replied. That was enough. "All right, I'll be there," she said. By Friday evening, the house started to feel different, not because anything had been removed, but because something had been added. Movement. Anticipation. I opened windows that hadn't been touched in months, let fresh air move through the rooms, sunlight falling across surfaces that had felt fixed for too long. Rebecca noticed. Of course she did. She moved through the space more carefully now, watching, adjusting, but not interfering. Not yet. Because this wasn't something she could correct with a sentence. It wasn't a request she could deny. It was the environment itself, shifting. Saturday came with noise. The front door opened and closed, footsteps across the floor, voices overlapping in the kitchen. George arrived first, standing in the doorway like a man stepping into a place he remembered differently. He looked at me. Really looked. Then stepped forward and pulled me into a brief, solid embrace. "Good to see you," he said. "You too," I answered. No explanation, none needed. Lily came in not long after, dropping her bag by the door, scanning the room with a kind of quiet disbelief. "Smells like actual food in here," she said. "Don't get used to it," I replied. She smiled, but her eyes lingered a second longer than the joke required. Then Caleb showed up, leaning against the doorway, watching the whole thing unfold, saying nothing. The kitchen filled slowly, plates on the counter, drinks passed from hand to hand, chairs pulled closer together without anyone being told to do it. Rebecca moved through it, still composed, still present, but something about her rhythm didn't match the room anymore. Because the room wasn't arranged around her. It was moving on its own. Conversations started without her, continued without her direction. People laughed, interrupted each other, filled the space in ways that didn't wait for permission. That was the difference. You don't break a system like this by confronting it head-on. You change the conditions it depends on. And when those conditions shift, even slightly, the system has nothing to organize itself around. I stood at the edge of the kitchen for a moment, watching it all. The light coming in through the back window, catching dust in the air, voices layering over one another. It didn't feel controlled. It felt alive. And for the first time in a long time, this house didn't feel like something that needed to be managed. It felt like something that was starting to breathe again. Helen Parker arrived later than everyone else, just after the noise had settled into something steady. She stepped through the front door slowly, one hand on the frame, the other holding her purse close to her side, eyes moving across the room before she said a word. "Henry," she said, looking straight at me. I walked toward her, took her hands instead of leaning in. That was enough. Her fingers tightened slightly, not in greeting, but in recognition. She didn't say anything right away, just studied my face, longer than comfort allows. "You're not him," she said quietly, not accusing, just certain. I didn't answer. There was no point in pretending past that moment. She nodded once, slow, like a thought had finally reached its end. "I wondered how long it would take me to be sure," she added, almost to herself. We moved to the back porch, the air cooler there, the sound from the kitchen muffled behind the door. Helen stood with her hands resting lightly on the railing, looking out into the yard without really seeing it. "I taught her this," she said after a moment. The words came without hesitation, no defense, no softening. "I didn't mean to," she continued, "but that doesn't change it." I leaned against the post beside her, waiting. "My husband ran our house the same way," she said. "Quiet rules, small corrections, everything organized around him without ever needing to say it out loud." She let out a breath. Slow, measured. I thought that was strength. I thought if Rebecca learned it, she'd never be the one losing control. There was a pause, longer this time. But that's not what it was. Her voice didn't break, but something in it shifted, like a truth settling into place after years of being avoided. "It was fear," she said. "Not loud, not dramatic, just accurate." I watched her hands tighten slightly on the railing, the only sign of tension she allowed herself. "She loves him," I said. "I know," Helen replied. "That's what makes it harder." Another pause. Because when you love someone like that, and you only know how to hold on by controlling them, you don't see what you're doing until something breaks. Inside the house, I could hear laughter, chairs moving, the low rhythm of conversation. A different kind of space than the one she was describing. "Will you talk to her?" I asked. Helen turned her head slightly, just enough to acknowledge the question. "That's why I'm here," she said. Before I could respond, the sound of a car door closing came from the driveway. We both looked up. The engine ticked softly as it cooled. Then footsteps, slow, familiar. I stepped back toward the door, opened it just enough to see into the kitchen. Rebecca stood near the counter, her posture still composed, but her eyes moved toward the front of the house. The door opened. Henry stepped inside. Same height, same face, but his weight was different. He didn't rush, didn't hesitate, just walked forward, like a man who had decided something on his own for the first time in a long while. The room shifted, not loudly, just enough. Lily stood up without thinking. Caleb straightened in his chair. George turned slightly, watching. Rebecca didn't move at first. She just looked at him, really looked, like she was seeing something that had always been there, but not in a way she could ignore anymore. Henry stopped a few feet from her, not close, not distant, just present. No one spoke. The space between them held everything that hadn't been said for years. Rebecca's expression changed, not all at once. First confusion, then recognition, then something deeper, something that didn't have a quick answer. She opened her mouth slightly, like she was about to speak, then stopped. Because whatever she had prepared, it didn't fit this moment. Henry didn't fill the silence. He just stood there, steady. And for the first time since I had walked into that house, the balance of the room didn't belong to Rebecca anymore. It hung there, unresolved, waiting, and I couldn't tell yet what she was going to do with it. Henry didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He pulled out a chair at the kitchen table and sat down, slow, deliberate, the kind of movement that says a decision has already been made. "I'm not asking anymore," he said, not looking away from Rebecca. "I'm telling you how this is going to be." The room stayed still. Even the small sounds seemed to fade. Rebecca didn't interrupt. That was new. "I'm keeping my schedule," he continued. "I'm seeing who I want to see, and I'm not explaining basic choices like they need permission." His tone didn't shift. No anger, no sharp edges, just clarity. That's what made it land. Rebecca's hand rested against the counter, fingers slightly curled, like she was holding on to something she couldn't quite feel anymore. "You've changed," she said. Henry nodded once. "I had to," he replied. There was a long pause. Not empty, just real. Then something unexpected happened. Rebecca sat down across from him, not in control, not directing, just sitting. "I don't know how to do this differently," she said, voice quieter than I had ever heard it. Henry didn't answer immediately. Then we figure it out, he said. Or we don't, but it won't be like before. She looked down at the table, then back up. Therapy, she said, like the word itself was unfamiliar. Henry held her gaze. Yes, he said. Another pause, shorter this time. Okay, Rebecca said. No argument. No condition. Just agreement. It wasn't dramatic. No one clapped, no one said anything. But something shifted. Not fixed, not solved, just moved in a direction it hadn't gone in years. Later that evening, the house felt different again. Not tense, not controlled, just quieter in a way that didn't press down on you. Lily sat at the table with a cup in her hands, watching her parents talk, really talk. Caleb leaned back in his chair, not scanning the room anymore, just there. George stood by the sink, rinsing a glass without being asked. Small things, but real. That's how it starts. Not with a perfect moment, but with a different one. I stepped outside for a minute, the air cool against my face, the sound of voices still drifting through the open window behind me. 30 years doesn't reset in a day. Patterns don't disappear just because they've been seen. But once they are seen, they can't go back to being invisible. And that's where the change begins. Not in control, in awareness. Family isn't supposed to feel like a system you have to navigate. It's not a place where love is measured by obedience. And it's not something you hold together by making one person smaller so the rest can feel stable. Love isn't ownership. And silence, the kind that keeps everything from breaking. It doesn't protect anything. It just slowly erases the person holding it in. I've seen what that does. I've seen how long it can last. And I've seen what happens the moment someone decides to stop playing that role. If any part of this feels familiar, if you've ever caught yourself asking permission for something that should have been yours to choose, or watched someone you care about disappear piece by piece without knowing how to step in, leave something, anything, just to say you see it too. Because sometimes the first step isn't fixing it, it's recognizing it. And maybe, just maybe, that's where everything starts to change. So let me ask you something. Have you ever been in a relationship where you had to ask permission just to be yourself? If you think silence is weakness, watch what happens next. Tap the video on your screen. This story goes even further.